you for the invite. Again, my name's Tony Edwards. I'm the warning coordination meteorologist with the National Weather Service in Charleston, West Virginia. I'll give you a little bit of a background about who I am here in just a minute, what I do. But then I want to talk about wild West Virginia weather and some of the weather extremes that we can face here in the Mountain State and have faced in the past. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you can get involved in helping us observe the weather and become a citizen scientist. So we'll go ahead and get into the presentation. Here's, of course, me and my sidekick JoJo, my puppy dog hiking partner, who's actually sleeping behind me here on a beanbag. But I'm the warning coordination meteorologist. So I'm basically the principal interface between the National Weather Service Forecast Office and the users of its products. So I do a lot of outreach. Prior to COVID, it was actually in person. Now I do a lot of stuff remotely and virtually like I am today from the comfort of my own home. Hopefully one of these days I'll be able to get back out and do that outreach in person. But we do a lot of spotter training, a lot of training of students and teachers and emergency managers and all kinds of good stuff. So we actually cover about 34 counties here in West Virginia. This map on the right shows how West Virginia is broken out by National Weather Service coverage. And also on this slide are the names of folks that you should get in touch with if you have any more questions about some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about, especially the citizen scientist aspect of the weather presentation that I'm going to give. But again, I work for the National Weather Service. So usually when I tell people I'm a meteorologist, they ask me what TV station do I work for? And I have to tell them I don't work on TV, but this is what we do. That's our mission, is to issue forecasts and warnings for the protection of life and property. So anytime you get a weather warning alert, whether you get it from TV or your cell phone or however, that comes from your local National Weather Service office. So that's what we do. So I want to talk about some wild West Virginia weather, and I love history. I really love weather history. I've been in West Virginia 4 years. Prior to that, I was in Eastern Kentucky for 12 years. And I grew up in East Tennessee. So I have a pretty good understanding, at least over the past 43 years. I just turned 43 on Saturday. But I have a pretty good knowledge base of the weather in this region. But I've actually gone back and studied the history of the weather in this region quite a bit. But I love history. I love all aspects of history, and I really love this quote from Winston Churchill: "The farther backward you can look, the farther forward you're likely to see." In other words, if it happened in the past, there's a good chance it could happen again, and it's probably good to prepare for it and be ready for it. We have a short-term memory, it seems like, to a lot of things, and even when it comes to weather, we tend to forget about things that have happened in the past, or we don't talk about to our relatives, to our grandparents about what weather they suffered through. But this presentation will talk about a few of those events. When we talk about overall weather disasters, when a disaster hits, FEMA, often you hear the term a federal disaster area, a federal disaster declaration. That frees up some federal money to come into the state to help the state deal with that weather event. So I went back to 1954 and looked at all the disaster declarations in the state of West Virginia, and all but one of them was weather related. In fact, there's over 60 here, and you can see the vast majority of them are severe thunderstorms and flooding. In fact, 52 of them involve either severe thunderstorms or flooding overall. But we're in the middle of winter. In fact, this week in West Virginia, ending today, is a Winter Weather Awareness Week, and winter storms have accounted for 8 when you count Superstorm Sandy, which was all winter in West Virginia. We didn't have to deal with the flooding aspect or the hurricane aspect of that storm, but 8 federal disaster declarations in the state have dealt with winter. And then we have drought as well. So, we live in a state that's diverse when it comes to weather threats. And I wanted to start with winter since we're heading into the winter months. And one of the worst storms that has affected our region happened back on November 1950. So, a long time ago. Not too many people remember that, unless you're, probably in your 60s or 70s, you maybe remember this. But this was a major storm that impacted our region back in November 1950. And you can see some of the snowfall totals. Coburn Creek, West Virginia, over the course of this storm, received 62 inches of snow. and that is the all-time state record for snowstorm in West Virginia, 62 inches. Now, the interesting thing about this storm and what makes it so extreme is that it took almost 6 days, almost a week of snow. And it started on the 24th, early in the morning on the 24th, as an Arctic cold front moved through, and it didn't stop snowing until the 30th of November. So during that period of time, the snow was heavy, it was wind blown, and winds over 30 miles per hour with temperatures in the single digits. There were over 160 deaths, in fact, over 300 deaths over the entire course of the storm in the Ohio Valley and Northeast. So now, try to envision what would happen today if we were to have this type of a winter storm. We had the ice storms last year in the tri-state region of West Virginia, really devastating ice storms in around Huntington area and back into Kentucky and southern Ohio, which paralyzed the region. But think about this over the entire state, getting widespread power outages, really cold wind chills and winds, and just the inability to travel, and how harsh that would be if it were to repeat today. And again, if it happened in the past, and there's numerous instances of winter storms, maybe not as long lasting as this one, but if it happened in the past, it can happen again. How cold can it get in West Virginia? Well, this map on the right shows the coldest observed temperatures, kind of broad brush, but in general, 20 to 30 below zero temperatures can be expected across our state. And there's even been some pockets of 30 to 40 below zero temperatures observed in the past. The coldest temperature observed on record, that's recognized state record, is Lewisburg, 37 below zero back in December 30th, 1917. Other notable cold spells include a February 1899 blast that sent temperatures and snow all the way into southern Florida. 35 below zero was observed in Harrison County during that event. January 1912, 34 below. January 1963, it was 30 below in Nicholas County. January 1994, 23 below in Wayne County around Huntington. And as recently as February 2015, it dropped to 21 below in Kanawha County. So these Arctic outbreaks happen periodically, and so it's important to know just exactly how cold it can get around here. And that's not even factoring in wind chill, which you often have to deal with. So that's an idea about winter extremes. One of the major weather events that we have to deal with repeatedly in the state of West Virginia is heavy rainfall and flooding. Some of our worst disasters, in fact, this is probably one of the worst disasters that has hit the state as far as weather goes, was the Election Day floods of November 1985. So the map on the left shows how much rain fell from this event. It was kind of wet in the beginning, and then a tropical system, some moisture got entrained into a low pressure system and dumped between 6 and 10 inches of rain over the mountains and the Tigard River Valley and parts of the eastern part of West Virginia, with even 2 to 4 inches back into the west. So this produced some incredible flooding across the region. In fact, there were 3,500 homes and 180 businesses destroyed by this flood. 123 bridges were damaged or destroyed, and the damages in total were $570 million. And if you adjust that due to inflation to current day values, that's well over $1 billion in damages. And in fact, I did some rough math on this, and if you add up all the floods that have happened since 1985, the damages accumulated from those floods don't beat the damages that occurred in this one flood in November 1985. So pretty remarkable flooding. And unfortunately, 47 people were killed due to these floods. So this is a pretty devastating event. Another one that a lot of people probably remember, maybe even lived through, was the June 2016 floods. And this map shows the radar imagery of these thunderstorms dropping down to West Virginia. And here's the rainfall rates on the right at Lewisburg. And Lewisburg received 3.69 inches of rain in 24 hours as these thunderstorms just passed repeatedly, one after another, over the location, and overall got almost 7 inches. What did that do? Well, here's some pictures of the impacts of the floods in the White Sulphur Springs area of Greenbrier County. So major floods there. And this is something that we see kind of repeat pretty often here in the Mountain State and in our region. And so it's one of those things that we're very vigilant about, and we try to issue those forecasts and warnings on well ahead of time so folks can heed the flooding. When it comes to flash floods and flooding across the state, they've killed numerous people. In fact, over half of West Virginia counties have experienced at least one death attributed to flooding over the past 30 years. This map on the left shows the breakdown of flood deaths in each county. And the interesting thing about this is usually a majority of the floods occur folks in vehicles driving through floodwaters. And so it's a really preventable deaths. 48%, the graph here shows that those were either in vehicles. And then when we talk about the 36% that fell in the water were outside, a lot of those, their vehicles were stalled due to flooding, and then they got out and were washed away. So definitely one of those things you don't want to do is drive through floodwaters, but it's something that happens quite often. Now, tornadoes. A lot of people, when they think of West Virginia, they don't think about tornadoes, but tornadoes do happen here quite regularly. Overall, when you look at the state as a whole, there's been over 170 plus tornadoes documented in the state. And the thing is if a tornado touches down in the middle of the woods and nobody's around to see it or hear it, does a tornado touch down? Well, it does, but we don't know about it. So these are only the tornadoes that we know about. And as you know, there's a lot of woods and forests in West Virginia. So there's a lot of tornadoes that have touched down that we don't know about. But there have been some large tornadoes in this state as well. The most tornado touchdowns in any county is Kanawha County. There's been 11 documented tornado touchdowns there. The earliest tornado on record that I've been able to find was back in 1887, and that was a pretty strong F2 tornado. The F scale, the Fujita scale, goes all the way up to 5, but a 2 is a pretty strong tornado, and it actually struck the Ripley Courthouse there in Jackson County. But the strongest and deadliest and longest track tornado that was entirely in the state of West Virginia was the Shinston tornado. That's what it's known as, which was a long track tornado that was part of an overall outbreak back in 1944. So the Shinston tornado, and you can see it as I go back on the map, you can see this streak that comes down from Marion County across Harrison County and into Barber County and Randolph County. That is that tornado. There's also another one that occurred at the same time up in Pennsylvania that was also a very strong F4 tornado. So the Shinston tornado tracked 300 yards wide. It tracked 60 miles long through Marion, Harrison, Barber, Taylor, Randolph, and Tucker counties. This happened during 1944. We didn't have the radar system that we have in place now. We didn't have the ability to issue the weather warnings that we have now. In fact, due to World War II, there was actually a lack of communication at this time. So a lot of people had no clue what it was coming at them. They had no history of tornadoes in that region. They didn't know what a tornado was. They'd never seen it. And a lot of folks, I remember reading some accounts of this tornado. They thought that it was a smoke column or a smoke cloud or some other kind of event until it got so close, and because it was so large. Unfortunately, it killed 30 people in the community of Shinston, and 100 plus were killed across the entire state. So large tornadoes, again, they don't happen very often. We've had usually once in a lifetime kind of event that we get these major tornadoes in West Virginia. But when they do, they can be quite deadly. And then derechos. So a lot of folks in West Virginia know what the word derecho means. Other places I've worked across the country, I say that word and they don't know what it means. But we know about it in West Virginia because a lot of us lived through it back in 2012. But I'm going to talk about a different derecho. So while you may remember the 2012 derecho, there was another infamous derecho that hit the state back in 1991. And this storm actually caused 2 deaths, 86 injuries, and an estimated $16 million in damage as it moved from southwest to northeast across the state. You can see the map here on the left shows the progression of that storm, and then everywhere there's a little plus sign, that's either wind damage or wind gusts greater than 58 miles per hour. And some measured wind gusts include Charleston at 66. Elkins hit 69 miles per hour during this particular storm. And the big winner was Kaiser at 77, or Kaiser, excuse me, 77 miles per hour, and Martinsburg at 63. So derechos happen every now and then too. And a derecho is just a thunderstorm that produces a large gust of wind out from it. So wind damage is our primary concern here in West Virginia, along with the flood threat. And these monster, quote unquote, monster windstorms called derechos do happen periodically. So that's a look at the lessons from the past. Now, on several of these slides, there's actually a website down at the bottom here. If you Google hazard risk assessment or go to our webpage and look for a hazard risk assessment link at weather.gov/CharlestonWV, it'll take you to a whole bunch of graphics and information related to past weather records in our region and past weather events. So that's a good resource if you want more information on these hazards and hazardous weather events. But when it comes to weather safety, now that we have a good kind of baseline knowledge of the weather extremes that we may face here in West Virginia, it's important to prepare and to be aware of the forecast, remain aware of the forecast, know and understand that forecast. Check it every day. Hopefully you do that. One thing I do say, don't necessarily just rely on the app on your phone, because not a lot of information there. I do always tell folks to get their weather information locally. Find that local source that you know and trust, and stay briefed up on the weather that you face. Prepare disaster kits for all seasons. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but that is one of the most important things that you can do for any weather event, even non-weather emergencies, is have that disaster kit in case you are forced to be kind of self-reliant and self-sufficient for up to 3 days. Have those shelter locations in mind. We talked about that tornado, the Shinston tornado, and those large tornadoes that do happen in our state sometimes. Do you have a place to go that's safe in the event that was to happen? If not, try to think about that. Maybe develop that plan. If you've got a neighbor, a big thing is mobile homes. If you live in a mobile home in a tornado or a derecho, a windstorm, they're not safe. So you want to have a plan, someplace you can go and to get to a safe place. And when a watch is issued, plan your day around the weather, when we're talking about maybe a flood watch or a severe thunderstorm watch. But when that warning is issued, maybe your cell phone goes off and alerts you to the fact that there's a tornado warning or a flash flood warning. That's when you need to take appropriate action. So here's the 72-hour kit, or the ready kit, or the emergency kit, or whatever you want to call it. Basically, it's whatever you need: food, water, medicine, to get you through 72 hours. If in case we do get a winter storm here in a couple of weeks that just you can't get out of the house for 3 or 4 days. What do you have? Everything you need? Do you have a backup heat source, flashlights, all kinds of things that you could add to this, but depending on your personal needs. But the bare minimum is 72 hours worth of food, water, and any prescription medicines that you have. And think about your pets as well. They're going to need to eat and drink, and if they have any prescriptions as well. So always keep that in mind. Some good resources here. Ready.gov/kit is a great resource to go to. There's even a checklist that you can print off and take to the store to get your emergency kit. And again, that's the best thing you can do to be prepared for anything Mother Nature throws at you, or even non-weather related. Weather alerts. Have a way to get warnings. Luckily, you don't even have to do anything. There's something called wireless emergency alerts that's built into your cell phones that will give you weather alerts, such as tornado warnings, extreme flash flood warnings, even snow squall warnings, to alert you when there's snow squalls, which are really intense, almost blizzard-like snow showers that can really affect you when you're traveling. But these are built into your cell phones. Just make sure they're turned on, because sometimes these can get turned off. You may go in and turn them off, but make sure they're turned on, because they're not going to do you any good if they're turned off. And there's all kinds of other apps that you can get to provide you weather alerts if you want more than just the base that's going to come with these wireless emergency alerts. And finally, when it comes to flooding, move to higher ground early. Don't wait until the last minute. And do not attempt to cross flowing streams or drive around road closed barriers. It only takes about 2 feet of flowing water to carry away most vehicles. And if folks just didn't do what this person's doing on this image here, then there'd be a lot less flood-related deaths in the state and even across the country. So when flooded, turn around, don't drown is what we try to say. So now you can help us. So we've talked about the weather extremes. We've talked about how to stay safe. I want to talk a little bit about how to become a citizen scientist. You know, we have all these tools at our disposal in the Weather Service to issue those warnings. Radar is a big one, but we still need human beings, especially when it comes to measuring snow. We don't have any automated way to measure snow, so we still need human beings to measure that snow. But there's 3 different ways I'm going to talk about to become a citizen scientist. This works for school teachers. This works for average everyday citizens. It works for students in school. One is to become a weather spotter. There's a link on the screen here that will take you to a web page with more information on how to become a weather spotter. Basically, spotters are the eyes and ears of the National Weather Service. They keep their community safe by providing us weather information and helps us in our warnings, in the warning process. We even offer a junior weather spotter class at the Weather Service in Charleston. So we teach children how to stay safe in severe weather and how to properly report it using social media. So that is an aspect. And so we even have some winter weather classes coming up. So go to weather.gov/CharlestonWV or the link on your screen there and look for Weather Spotter, and you can find some more information on how to become a weather spotter. There's also an app that you can use in order to report precipitation type. Whether you're getting hail, rain, freezing rain, snow, you know, that means a lot to us trying to get a forecast right, because West Virginia is always kind of in the dividing line between what's rain and what's snow and freezing rain. When we get these winter storms, very rarely do we just have a storm that just dumps snow all over the state. We get a lot of different types of weather. So you can use this app called MPing, and you can search on your iPhone or Android. Just look for MPing in the App Store, download it, and it just takes a couple clicks and you can report the weather that's going on in your backyard. And then we've got CoCoRaHS. Now, CoCoRaHS is a funny acronym that stands for Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. So it is a volunteer network of weather observers who measure precipitation either in their backyard or their schoolyard. And any age can volunteer. There's actually a program just for schools called CoCoRaHS for Schools, and it has lessons plans and activities, and basically the students become the weather observers. And while you may only be there Monday through Friday to take the observations, you can actually report on Monday how much rain fell over the weekend, how much snow's fallen. All that's, we'll take whatever we can get, but this is a really neat kind of program. I'd love to see more schools in the state take advantage of this. It only takes a few minutes a day to take and record the measurements, but then the students learn the weather patterns, and they can go to the website and see how much the precipitation varied from their school to the next closest weather observer that may be located nearby. And so it's a really kind of fun activity. Again, lessons plans and activities are available at the link on your screen, or you can just Google CoCoRaHS for Schools and it'll take you to the information available there. Want to learn more about weather? There's a Jetstream online weather school. Just Google Jetstream or weather.gov/Jetstream will take you there. There's different modules, lessons, plans, and activities, and even review questions that you can learn more about the weather. And then there's a nice little weather-wise, cloud-wise poster that's available as well through this Jetstream. A whole bunch of things that you can download and integrate into your lessons plans or print off for your children, even some coloring books for the young ones on there as well. So a lot of good resources available. And I'll finish with this. Again, we cover in Charleston 34 counties in West Virginia, the counties in green. And so I would be the primary contact in those counties, but the rest of the state, this is the folks that you need to reach out to get more information, maybe about CoCoRaHS for School, about becoming a weather spotter, or you just want to maybe set up a school talk or any kind of information. These folks are the warning coordination meteorologists at the local National Weather Service offices, and they can give you more information about the Weather Service coming out and talking to your kids or what have you. They're the primary contacts. And so pretty much that's all I've got. I really appreciate the opportunity to come out and talk to you, and hopefully you're leaving this presentation more prepared for what weather can bring to your region than you started.
Thank you so much, Tony. This was wonderful. And I have to say, just as a tie into the work that we do on a regular basis, we work with beekeepers, we do native plant work, and so a lot of outdoor work. And I know that gives me a sense of the weather, how it's changing all the time. They say if you want to know what the weather's going to be, ask a beekeeper, because they're always checking the weather. But I know also so many people live like our place is, we've got a low water crossing. So I'm always checking the gauges to see if it's going to get up, and then I might not be able to get out and plan around that. I guess I wondered if the cocoa raws, which I've heard of before, is that what you, when you look at historical data, for example, in the different regions for the National Weather Service, is that based on the cocoa raws data, or is it more kind of official professional folks who are contributing those statistics?
Well, both. So we have several different ways that we get observed weather information. We have the automated platforms at the airports that the pilots rely on. That's the official kind of climate sites. We also have what's called cooperative weather observers, which are volunteers that we actually provide equipment. They do a little more robust observations. They do temperature observations, and some of them even do agricultural type observations. But then cocoa raws is one of those official ways to get your weather observations into the long-term climate record. And we have several long-term cocoa raws observers. And one thing that's very important is that snowfall. We don't have any official, measurements of snowfall other than human beings. And cocoa raws, especially if you have maybe I talked about those federal disaster declarations. If we have a winter storm that hits the state, and the county that you live in, they have to spend a lot of money to clean up after that winter storm. They can actually get reimbursed by the federal government, but FEMA requires an actual observation to see how harsh that winter storm was. And if there's no weather observers in that county, they could miss out on that because there's no documented weather observer in the county. So cocoa raws is a great way to help us out, help your county out in getting those weather observations.
That's great. I noticed there were some gaps in the map that you showed.
Yeah.
Lots of opportunity there. And just earlier this week, the western end of Greenbrier County, where we are today, where I am, there was snow on the cars coming into town. And of course, the other end of the county, there was nothing. So very localized. I have a question that was submitted by someone on our list, and they were asking that they've heard about La Nina going on right now and into the near future. And if you could just say a little bit about that, how that might affect West Virginia.
Yeah, so La Nina, El Nino, you may have heard those two terms. They're opposites of each other. La Nina is the current weather pattern that we're in the Pacific Ocean, and it's basically a water temperature pattern. So La Nina means water temperatures in the eastern and central Pacific are colder than normal. El Nino is when they're warmer than normal. And you may wonder, well, why does that matter for us in West Virginia? Well, those water temperatures, the Pacific Ocean is so large, and those water temperature patterns actually do influence the weather over the entire northern hemisphere and really pretty much the entire globe. So there's certain weather patterns that translate downstream when we're talking about La Nina. And so that's what we look at when we're trying to forecast the winter ahead. And so with a La Nina weather pattern, typically we see above normal precipitation and above normal temperatures in West Virginia. In fact, most of the Ohio Valley. So that's what we're kind of expecting this winter. But there are a lot of other kind of factors that come into play that are much harder to predict than the water temperatures in the Pacific that can sometimes overrule the La Nina patterns. So, long-term weather forecasting is complicated, we'll put it that way. But La Nina is one of the things that we try to look at to try to gauge how harsh the winter is going to be, or those longer term winter patterns.
I see. Another question that we got in here was, how do you predict a derecho? And I've wondered this myself. I remember reading articles at the time because I remember the 2012 derecho and just how confusing it was to me. It just seemed to come out of nowhere. There wasn't a drop of rain in my town either. So it just seemed like it was just the wind. And so how do you all predict a derecho?
So I was working shift. I wasn't in West Virginia, but I was on shift in Eastern Kentucky when the derecho happened. And we did not forecast it very well because one of the things that we rely on are computer models, and they do not handle thunderstorms and volatile weather like we had that day. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you remember how hot it was before the derecho and after the derecho. We hit 105 in Huntington before that derecho, so it was very hot. And so the atmosphere is very volatile when it gets that hot. And so those thunderstorms developed near Chicago, and they just kept going. They ended up 12 hours later off of Washington, D.C., off the coast of Maryland. And we really had to catch up. We saw them develop over Chicago, and then you're wondering, how are they going to be able to make it south into West Virginia? And so we had a watch out and some warnings out ahead of time, but say, 24 hours, we didn't know it was going to happen like that. So those types of events are very difficult. Our computer models are getting much better at being able to simulate what we call convection or thunderstorms. But it's one of those things that sometimes, it's we don't have a good handle on where those are going to develop more than maybe an hour or two in advance.
This is a question from our team for you. And I know that I've tried to describe the difference between weather and climate. We do a lot of field work with pollinators, for example. And so the climate change is something that we discuss in terms of changes in insect abundance, including our pollinators. And so climate is a word that we use a lot, but how would you describe the difference between weather and climate? I could use some pointers on that one.
Yeah, well, the way I define it is weather short-term, climate's long-term, and includes weather. But basically, we're in my job day to day, it's communicating the weather forecast. And so that's usually out 7 days in advance. When we're talking about climate, we're talking about years, we're talking about decades, centuries, about how those weather patterns and how those temperatures and all that kind of fluctuates in time and changes. And that's what makes climate change and climate so hard to grasp, is because we're so short-term oriented. We don't, yeah, I hear a lot of times, well, older folks will say, well, we don't get the winters that we used to, so they sometimes try to relate that to climate. So when we're trying to look at the climate change aspect of it, we're looking at those weather records that were taken every day to give us an idea of how hot and cold it was, but how that changes over time. And in order to get a really good picture of that, we need long-term weather records. And so that's why I'm always pushing CocoRaws, and I'm pushing folks to get involved, so we have a better picture of the weather now. And then those weather records will be kept, in 100 years from now, we'll be able to go back and see how those precipitation patterns were today and how they've changed. So it's a slowly evolving kind of thing. But the more people we can get observing now, it will help us in years to come. So hopefully that, weather short term, climate's much longer time scales.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing those different links. That was going to be one of my questions as well, was how do you get involved in one of these citizen science programs? And that's great. We'll also share that in the follow-up email, those links that you shared.
Yeah.
One more question, Tony, unless anybody else chats another question, is we always like to ask, what got you into this work? What was your path to your job as a meteorologist?
So I've always been interested in weather. I was actually scared to death of thunderstorms when I was a little kid, but I wanted to be a meteorologist, wanted to be a weather person. And my mother asked me, she said, how are you going to be a weather person when you're scared of thunderstorms? And so I remember that conversation. I had a 5th grade teacher that really just helped me explore it even more, and cultivated that. And then just kind of always wanted to be a meteorologist. So I actually went to school at UNC Asheville, got a 4-year degree there in atmospheric sciences, and then went to work in Alaska. I actually got in the weather service, spent 2 years in Alaska in Barrow and Fairbanks, and then moved to Kentucky, spent 12 years in Kentucky, and then been here in Charleston for a little over 4 years now. So that's been my history. And most of the folks I work with, about 50% of them had that passion when they were little, and then 50% of them, about half of them, went into the military and were told they were going to do weather and liked it so much. So that's typically how it shakes out in our field.